We know that the fall is coming soon. We know that schools are going to be opening in some locations. We know that the fall is coming soon. We know that the fall is coming soon.
So the reality is most students are not being taught information about LGBTQ people, history, and events in schools, and that includes sex education.
DeKalb County parents are raising concerns tonight about a test given to middle school students.
Now, the quiz included questions like, what is it called when a woman is attracted to a woman? It was given as part of a 6th grade lesson on sexual orientation and gender identity.
Identity definition is part of the official curriculum with the DeKalb County School District. The mother we spoke to says it doesn't matter to her because she believes it's her role to teach her child about sexuality. It has 10 questions asking 6th graders to identify various sexual preferences or identities like gay, lesbian, and transgender.
Tonight, a school district in Ventura County will start teaching gender diversity in grades kindergarten through 5th grade. Educators say it's a way to create a safe environment for students.
Yeah, but some parents are not happy with this new curriculum.
The district says there are students here across the gender spectrum, including transgender students, and the board passed this in April. Well, tonight, some parents are not happy about it.
In case are not happy with what they're introducing because we feel that it's very inappropriate for kids that age, namely our son. He's in 2nd grade.
Some parents are against Oak Park Unified School District's new kindergarten through 5th grade gender diversity program that teaches kids based on their age about expressions of gender, including male and female, non-binary, and transgender.
There might be some confusion getting into kids' minds. I mean, that's what I think.
Public schools in Illinois will be required to teach students about the contributions of so-called LGBTQ people under a new law signed by Governor J.B. Pritzker. The new law, set to take effect in July of 2020, mandates history lessons taught in the state's public schools include a study of the roles and contributions of, quote, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people in Illinois and the rest of the U.S. The lessons must be taught to students before they complete the 8th grade.
This is a mandate on grade schoolers to learn something that really, you'd expect to see in a graduate seminar at a liberal university, not something that is part of the basics of reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Over this survey sent to young students, asking them personal questions about their gender identity, if they're transgender, and asking them to describe their sexual orientation. Tonight, hundreds of parents are sounding off, saying the questions are too personal and inappropriate.
Some parents tell me terms like non-binary, gender fluid, and pansexual are all terms that are foreign concepts to students as young as 5th graders. But CMS says terms like these can help them to better assess the student climate.
How do you describe your gender identity? Do you identify as transgender? Which best describes your sexual orientation?
5th grade, they're like, what is this, Mommy?
Wondering why they're really asking those questions right now, especially with that grade.
I feel like those questions should be saved for like junior high, high school, when they are a little bit more exposed to those kind of things.
Parents say they did not know that students got a survey that asked their gender identity and sexual orientation.
I know I only found out after I asked my child about it, and that's when he told me. It's the survey that's been given to middle and high school students, asking them how they describe their sexual identity and if they identify as transgender.
In a major win for the LGBTQ community, the Supreme Court today ruled employers cannot discriminate based on sexuality. The conservative court ruled the Civil Rights Act of 1964 does protect gay, lesbian, and transgender workers. That might have changed things for a Mansfield teacher suspended 3 years ago after telling students she was engaged to a woman.
It is not appropriate for teachers to promote the LGBTQ agenda.
Kids are being used as guinea pigs for reopening the economy.
Classrooms are allowed to reopen this fall. But once open, students and staff will have to wear masks and social distance, among other requirements.
It seems confrontations like the one in this next story are happening more and more.
A Chicago woman arrested after a man said she spit in his face because he took off his mask at Costco.
And she happens to be a teacher.
Officers say she rammed her cart into his, telling him to put it back on. He ignored her, so she yelled, quote, "I'm a school teacher and I have COVID-19. She then took off her mask and spit in his face, deputies say, leaving the store in her car back on June 16th.
You know, the question is whether or not, for example, there could be some sort of emergency use authorization for some populations.
Many people are very wary of the president pushing a vaccine in truly record time.
It will be first offered to frontline healthcare workers, but actually large-scale trials will only begin after the slated approval. That decision is raising widespread concerns that the safety of the vaccine might be compromised in an effort to be the first country in the world to get a vaccine approved.
All right, the idea of what we used to think of as a normal life seems out of reach in the middle of a pandemic. Even with a vaccine, Dr. Theresa Tam has warned it could take years before physical distancing and all those mask rules can be relaxed.
Well, around this time every year, preparations begin for the flu season. But as you're well aware, things are a lot different this year. Metrorel tells us that the vaccine makers are preparing for a record year.
The four major makers of flu shots together say they plan to supply almost 200 million doses of vaccine to the U.S., up from about 170 million last season.
This is about 15% more vaccine than we've ever produced before. Both the public and private demand for this upcoming season has been tremendous.
Fewer than half of American adults and about 60% of kids typically get the flu shot each year. Now, public health officials say they plan an even greater push for vaccination this year amid the COVID-19 pandemic.
Ask people if they'll be first in line to get a COVID-19 vaccine.
I get the flu shot every year, so why wouldn't I get a vaccine if there is one?
I don't know if it's going to cause any complications later.
I want to know what would be in the vaccine.
And responses are all over the map.
I guess it's just, you don't want to be the first, you know.
A new Angus Reid survey found half of Canadians say they'll get a COVID-19 vaccination as soon as it's available. But around a third of respondents want to wait a while. 14% say they don't want to get vaccinated at all.
People need to widely accept it. And we know from other vaccines that there's a lot of discontent and fear.
No, this is exactly the trial that we're going to tell us if the product is safe and effective. A large study that started, as you said, a week ago, and is progressing actually very, very nicely. Just to give you, for your viewers also, a sense of how things are working, we are going to vaccinate, to inject 30,000 people. 15,000 will receive the vaccine. 15,000 will receive placebo, basically saline. And no one will know if he received or she received the vaccine, not the patients that received it, not the doctors that they administered, not even us, because it's coded in a database that only a special committee has access.
You know, it's great people are paying attention to vaccines in a way, but a lot of that's the, false data. We'll see as the vaccine comes out. We don't need absolutely everyone to take it, but we need a pretty high percentage to take it to get the protection that eventually brings this epidemic to an end.
And on the other hand, we're still just putting our heads down and doing the work. It doesn't change our daily life to have those conspiracy theories out there. We know they're not true. They certainly come up a little bit with the kids in the household. By the way, we do have our son came home early from college, and unfortunately for him. That conversation comes up, but it doesn't change what we do on a day-to-day basis, luckily. I know my husband is not vaccinating people and putting a microchip in their arm because that technology doesn't even exist, and he's never uttered the words out of his mouth. So,
can the pandemic end without an effective vaccine?
Ultimately, if you really want to put the nail in the coffin of an outbreak, you're going to need a vaccine. There are a number of vaccines that have already entered phase 3 trial. There's one from England that is doing one in Brazil and South Africa. There is one that We started here in the 27th of July with Moderna. Pfizer started on the 27th of July. There are other companies that are going to be starting in the next month or 2 or 3. So you're talking about 5 or 6 or more companies, each of which have started at different times. We don't know which one is going to be better than the other. And you know what I hope? I hope they're all equivalently good, because that's what we need. We need vaccines not only for the United States, we need vaccines for the whole world.
Temperature checks, staggered schedules, and increased cleaning. Those are just a few of the guidelines. It is intended to be a roadmap for schools to safely reopen.
Washington State Public Schools will open this fall for in-person instruction. There will be a mask requirement for all students and staff in a K-12 setting. Schools are also advised to check for signs of illness among all students and staff every day upon entry.
A lot of educators are concerned with the new guidelines that the Texas Education Agency released to reopen schools in the fall. They say changes need to be made so schools don't become the next hotspot.
We don't get what is going on in Texas. There's like blinders on about what's going on in terms of public health and in the science.
They're still working on classrooms, but when the school year begins, every student and every teacher must wear a mask. Students will be given one mask and they'll get a mask break throughout the day.
With the pandemic requiring many students to distance themselves from the classroom while still finding ways to learn, educators are being forced to get creative and reimagine education this year.
The administration has worked around the clock to protect Americans from the coronavirus, but many challenges for children and families can be just as invisible as the virus and just as dangerous. As the start of the school year gets closer, I encourage parents, teachers, and school to teach children about the importance of CDC guidelines and to implement them when appropriate.
The CDC director noted that there would be additional guidance. The vice president noted that as well, but we're on the same page with Dr. Redfield, who has said, I don't want this guidance to be a reason for schools not to reopen. And he said that these were not meant to be prescriptions. They are guidelines. Ultimately, it's up to state and local governments as to what their guidelines look like. There are 47 states who have issued their own guidelines so far. And I would also note that the CDC recognizes in their guidelines that many of these things that they're recommending are not feasible, which is why they use the words not possible 18 times and not feasible 9 times. We want our schools to reopen. It's imperative for the health and well-being of the child.
We want to reopen the schools. Everybody wants it. The moms want it, the dads want it, the kids want it. It's time to do it. We don't want people to make political statements or do it for political reasons. They think it's going to be good for them politically, so they keep the schools closed.
Bill, I wanted to ask you about schooling, and not college, but primary schooling, and what you think of opening that up, given the fact that children don't seem to be infected.
The idea they're opening up some of those younger age schools, I think that's not crazy, and we should all learn from that. I didn't know Norway was doing that in a randomized way. That'll be very, very helpful because I'd like to see schools reopened in September. And of all the things that's right on the line of will it be wise, will it not be wise, that's the one that I hope we figure out how to make it work.
How can these children that are not vaccinated get into our schools? Under Texas law, all children are required to follow the state's vaccine requirements before going to school.
Today, a handful of students on Long Island quarantined on campus for not getting vaccinations. This is required by a new state law. This was day one for stricter regulations at several schools that no longer allow religious exemptions for vaccines. But keeping the kids isolated in a room on campus doesn't seem much of a solution either.
Throughout the state, we're talking about more than 26,000 students with religious exemptions, and in Suffolk County, nearly 2,800, all of them facing a deadline to start getting vaccinated.
Today, we are declaring a public health emergency effective immediately. This will mandate vaccines for people living in the affected area. Department of Health will issue violations and fines to people who remain unvaccinated.
Then there's Kimberly Adams, president of the Fairfax Education Association. She says a vaccination or a widely available treatment for COVID-19 is necessary before a full return to in-person instruction.
In this case, that the idea of having treatments available or a vaccine to facilitate the re-entry of students into the fall term would be something that would be a bit of a bridge too far. Even at the top speed we're going, we don't see a vaccine playing in the ability of individuals to get back to school this term.
Well, when we have the vaccine, we have the military all lined up, and the military is going to be doing it in a very powerful manner. These are people that don't usually do vaccines. They do soldiers, and they do lots of other things that, frankly, are more difficult. But we have our general, and logistically, he's all set. On vaccines, last week we announced a $2.1 billion partnership with Sanofi and GSX to purchase and produce 100 million doses of their coronavirus vaccine. We're balancing speed and safety, and we're on pace to have a vaccine available this year, maybe far in advance of the end of the year, and we're mass producing the most promising candidates in advance so that we're ready immediately upon approval. We have our military lined up. It's logistics. It's all about logistics. They deliver a lot of things, including soldiers, but now they'll be doing vaccine. Our general is all ready to go. We're engaged in the most rapid industrial mobilization by far since World War II. On therapeutics and vaccine, 3 vaccine candidates have now moved into phase 3 trials. This would be years ahead of schedule. We'll develop a vaccine. We're going to have it very soon, and we're ready to distribute it, and we've got the military ready. Logistics, it's called. And we'll end this pandemic, and we will rebuild the greatest economy in the history of the world.